getting nice Poisson summation formula. What does it imply? Okay. Anyway, we'll see one application right now, which is in the proof of the functional identity for the zeta function. And let's see if I can come to that today. I hope I'll be able to come to that today. So let's see. Okay, so let's start. So this was, which page is this? 94. This is the previous thing. So this was the proof of the Poisson summation formula. And remember, I was restricting myself to this class F, which was analytic and uniformly bounded on horizontal strips. Okay, in some region, in some set of strips that you have there. And basically, the proof of the Poisson summation formula here follows from the residue theorem. Okay, applied to this particular function fz over 2 pi I z minus 1. So, I mean, there are other proofs of the Poisson summation formula. I hope you will have a look at different proofs of the Poisson summation formula. Okay, and as a consequence, you get that summation Fn. Okay, somewhere or the other, always there's this business in the Poisson summation formula, interchanging. There's a sum and an integral, and you're interchanging them. Okay, this happens in every proof of the Poisson summation formula. So summation of Fn is summation of Fn hat. So in particular, you apply it to a function e to the minus pi x squared. Its Fourier transform is itself. And then you do this translation and dilation. Okay. So there's a dilation. So first there's a translation and then there's a dilation. It's multiplying by square root of t is a dilation. It's not quite a dilation for some other reason, but okay. Because when you talk about dilation, usually you want it to be a unitary map, preserving L2 norms. But anyway, it doesn't matter. So there's a translation by A and a dilation by root T. And so G is this e to the minus pi T x plus A squared. And then you calculate the Fourier transform of G, which you can by doing a change of variables. Okay, change of the origin and then a change of variables. And then you will get G hat is like this. And therefore the Poisson summation formula gives you this formula. Okay. And therefore, if you define theta t to be sum of e raised to minus pi n squared t, okay, what you get is that theta of t, you put a equal to 0, okay, and so theta of t is summation n squared t. So this is just you put a equal to 0 here, you get theta of t, and you put a equal to 0, you get t to the minus 1/2 theta 1 by t. So this, I hope you understand that this is a functional equation for theta functions. That means I'm relating theta at some point t to theta at some other point. That other point turns out to be 1 over t. Okay. And there's a consequence of this which says that, you see, when t is very large, obviously this theta of t is small. Okay, when t is very large, this theta of t is small. In particular, it is bounded. So this, when t is very large, okay, this quantity is bounded. Let me say this again. As t tends to infinity, okay, 1 over t tends to 0. Okay, theta of 0 is some finite number. Okay, and therefore theta of t, when t tends to 0, looks like 1 over square root of t. So remember, theta t is blowing up at t equal to 0, but it is blowing up in a nice enough manner. I have written this down later on. So near t equal to 0, theta of t looks like 1 over square root of t. And near t equal to infinity, okay, this thing has exponential decay, which I'll come to that in a little while. Okay, this is what I want from the theta function. This is why I had to talk about the Fourier transform because I wanted this result about theta functions, this particular theta function. And here was a series of exercises that had sort of isolated properties about the Fourier transform. Namely, what happens to the Fourier transform when you translate by a fixed amount? What happens to the Fourier transform when you multiply it by a character? This is your character A, e raised to 2 pi ax, 2 pi I ax. What happens to the Fourier transform when you do a dilation by t? And what happens to the Fourier transform when you do a reflection? So D is a reflection, C is a dilation, B is a multiplication by a character, and A is a translation. So there's this translation, dilation, reflection, and multiplication by a character. Okay, and then you apply all that to this particular thing. By the way, did anyone figure out what this convolutions of these functions are? Good, I asked you that. Did anyone do that? You take the characteristic function of 0, 1, call that f, and take the convolution of f with f. Any idea what that is? F of x minus t, ft, integral t, integral over the real numbers of integral from minus infinity to infinity of f of x minus t, ft dt. F is the characteristic function of 0, 1. Did anyone figure out what that is? No? Yes? Did anyone figure out what that convolution is for f convolved with f and f convolved with f convolved with f? And then I will ask you f convolved with f convolved with f convolved with f, and so on. No? Okay, I'll leave that also. I won't tell you the answer, but it turns out that that convolution is also important, and it sort of makes you understand that taking convolutions are important operations because they are smoothing operations. Okay, so they increase the smoothness of the function, whatever I mean by that. Anyway, so this was the last example that I had here, that you please try and do this calculation. It's an important calculation. Okay, so what are we doing today? So the first example, I think I had done this around the beginning of the course, or maybe in the second week or something, which says that integral of e raised to ax over 1 plus e to the x. Evaluate this integral. Okay, and the way you evaluate this is using residues, of course. So what you have to do is look at this function e raised to az. There's an a here, 0 less than a less than 1, and 1 plus e to the z. Okay, so this integral is an integral on the real line of that function. Yes, and what we want is the integral of the real line of the function, and therefore what do? You enclose a real line in some region. You enclose that minus r to r in some contour. The contour you will choose should enclose some 0 or a pole of f, This function is entire except for a 1 plus e to the z is equal to 0. Okay, and that means z must be pi I. Okay, or n pi I, whatever. And therefore, if you take this contour, which encloses pi I, okay, and it's of length, it's of height 2 pi. If you look at this contour from minus r to r, there is exactly one pole of the function, and you can calculate the residue of that function at that pole. It has a simple pole at pi I, and the residue of the function at pi I is minus e raised to pi IA. Okay. You should be able to calculate this. So the residue is equal to this. Okay. And therefore the integral of f over this contour is the sum of the residues, which is this. Okay. The integral over the horizontal line, real line, is what you want to calculate. Okay. So what I know is the integral of the whole thing, the boundary of the whole thing is this. I want the integral over this part, the real line. Then obviously I should say that the integral over the vertical parts should tend to 0 as r tends to infinity. Okay. Integral over the vertical paths tend to 0. I made a mistake here. That arrow here, this arrow over the real line is correct. The arrow over the right vertical line is correct. The arrow over the top horizontal line is correct. And the arrow over the left vertical line should be pointing downwards. Okay. And I made it point out upwards, so that is wrong. So it should be pointing downwards. Okay, so the integrals over those vertical lines tends to 0, you have to prove. And the integral over that horizontal line from right to left is minus the integral from the right, from left to right. And integral from left to right is the same as the original integral that we had. Okay, and therefore there's a minus sign coming in. And there's this factor that comes in there because everything gets multiplied by e raised to 2 pi ia. And therefore you'll get I minus e raised to 2 pi I is equal to this. And you simplify that, you get I is equal to pi over sine pi a. So this is just a consequence of the residue theorem. Okay. One more integral we want to write down, which is u v to the a minus 1 over 1 plus v dv. But notice that this looks very similar to this, e raised to ax over 1 plus e to the x. V to the something 1 plus v. So obviously you do the change of variable v equal to e to the x. Okay. And then you'll see that I2 is the same as I1 and I1 is pi over sine pi I. So this is actually what I want. Integral from 0 to infinity of v to the a minus 1 over 1 plus v dv is pi over sine pi a. Okay. So this is this consequence of the residue formula. Very good. What is the gamma function? All of you have heard about the gamma function. It's defined for s greater than 0 by gamma of s is 0 to infinity e to the minus t gamma t minus 1 dt. Notice that it is convergent because the places where you have a problem, okay, e to the minus t is growing much faster than gamma t to the s minus 1, okay, and at infinity. And at 0, this t to the s minus 1 is integrable. Therefore, you multiply this by this, the thing will be integrable. And this extends to an analytic function for s greater than 0. Instead of keeping s real, you put s equal to sigma plus it. Now, you know, this is again a difference that you will come across. That when you're talking about complex analysis per se, your z is always x plus iy, where x and y are real. But the convention is that when you're talking in number theory, the variable is s. So s is the complex variable. And the real and imaginary parts of s are called sigma and t. So S is equal to sigma plus IT. Okay. This is just a convention that is used always. Exercise is that gamma S plus 1 is S gamma S for real part of S equal to 0. What does this follow from? It follows from integration by parts. Okay. So gamma S plus 1 is S gamma S, and therefore this actually shows that the gamma function, when you have the gamma S plus 1 is S gamma S for real part of S greater than 0, you can extend it in the same way so that it satisfies the same equation. Gamma S plus 1 is S gamma S for all S, so that it becomes a meromorphic function with poles. Now, what does meromorphic mean? Meromorphic means that it can have only poles, okay, and the poles cannot have any limit points. That means in any finite region there exists only finitely many poles. Okay. I don't think I had said that. Yeah, I don't remember, but I don't think I have said that in this class yet. But anyway, so you see, I want this relationship to be true, and this is true for S greater than 1. So I use this to define gamma S. Okay, when real part of S lies between -1 and 0. So gamma S I will define to be gamma S plus 1 divided by S. That F1 of S be gamma S plus 1 divided by S. This is meromorphic with a simple pole, and this coincides with for real part of S greater than 0. Okay, it coincides with the gamma S that you have. It has a residue 1. For S greater than 2, you define S2 to be gamma S plus 2 over gamma over S plus 1 into S, and so on and so forth. Okay. So clearly this will be an extension of the gamma function, because F2 and F1, okay, when you put S is greater than 1, real part of S is greater than 1, it coincides with gamma S. Okay, and it has only poles at the negative integers including 0, and it has a residue. You can calculate the residue, which is -1 to the k over k factorial for k equal to 0, 1, and 2. Okay. So this is the analytic extension for meromorphic extension of gamma to the real part of S less than 0. Okay. And what we are interested in here is that there is a symmetry. There is some relationship between gamma S and gamma 1 minus S once I've extended it. Okay. So I want to show that in fact for all S in C, gamma S into gamma 1 minus S, forget about those negative integers, gamma S into gamma 1 minus S is pi over sine pi S. And remember, this pi over sine pi S is what I was talking about here also. There's a pi over sine pi S. Okay. So I want to say gamma S into gamma 1 minus S is pi over sine pi S. This is a very nice trick. Okay. And this is what is amazing about these calculations. They're so elementary, but then you have to come up with the right trick in some sense. That 0 less than S less than 1, therefore 0 less than 1 minus S less than 1. This is my definition of gamma S. Okay. And 1 minus S is also less than 1, and positive. So gamma 1 minus S is, you replace S by 1 minus S, and the figure t to the minus S. And then you do this change of variables. Let t equal to w times u. Okay, do the change of variables, and then you put w equal to t. So by a change of variables, you know that this quantity is this quantity. Okay, and notice that nu t, I'm going to put t times e to the nu t. This is just a change of variables. Okay. Now I multiply, this is gamma 1 minus S. I multiply gamma 1 minus S with gamma S. Okay, so my definition of gamma S is e to the minus t, t to the s minus 1 dt. I multiply it by gamma 1 minus S. And gamma 1 minus S, I'm going to write in this manner. You have to be careful that all these convergence, these things are convergent, but you know that that is true. Okay, I substitute for gamma 1 minus s, you get this. Okay, then obviously you bring the dt is outside, so you bring the t outside. Okay, now this is you change variables called vt equal to nu or whatever it is. This is t to the s. Okay, so there's a t to the s here and there's a t to the minus s here, which cancel. So you get e to the minus t, nu to the s, d nu, dt. And obviously when you come to this thing, okay, you interchange the two integrals. So you get e to the minus nu plus 1t, nu to the minus s d nu dt. Interchange the integral, e to the minus 1 plus nu t is 1 over 1 plus nu, 0 to infinity. But nu to the minus s over 1 plus nu d nu, 0 to infinity, is pi s, pi over sine pi 1 minus s. And notice that this is sine pi minus sine pi s. But sine of pi minus t is sine t. Okay, so you get sine s. So this, by this very elementary change of variables for 0 less than s less than 1, we get gamma s into gamma 1 minus s, gamma s into gamma n minus s. This is, I hope you understand that this is very elementary. All it involves is a change of variables, and then you're interchanging two variables, interchanging two integrals. Okay. So you get gamma s into gamma 1 minus s is pi over sine pi s. But I mean, there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes, because this is a consequence of the residue theorem, which is a consequence of Cauchy's integral formula, and so on and so forth. So this particular formula is a consequence of the Cauchy integral formula, which implies the residue theorem, which implies this and that and whatever. Okay. So you extend meromorphically gamma s into gamma 1 minus s to be a meromorphic function, and therefore one has poles at all negative integers, the other has poles at all positive integers, including 0. Okay. So you get a simple function, you extend the left-hand side meromorphically. So you get a meromorphic function which has simple poles at all integers. Okay. But this business also here, pi over sine pi s, also has meromorphic functions at all integers. Okay. So anyway, therefore this equation is true for all s. Okay, and this is where I need my theta function business that I have. That theta of t is this, and theta of t is t to the minus 1/2 theta 1 by t is what I was just explaining to you. And this equation followed from the fact that f x equal to e to the minus pi x squared is its own Fourier transform and the Poisson summation formula. And therefore, when t tends to 0, this quantity is bounded. So when t tends to 0, this looks like 1 over square root of t. Okay, as t tends to 0, theta t looks like, or is less than, I shouldn't even say looks like, I should say is less than t to the 1/2. When t tends to infinity, okay, remember theta t, you see the only thing that is not decaying here is the term which involves n equal to 0. Because when n equal to 0, there is no t dependence. So I take that over on the other side. So theta t minus 1. Okay. Theta t minus 1 is that sum n in pi, n in z minus 0. Okay. Now you notice that n and minus n, 2 and minus 2 give you the same sum. So instead of taking it n and z, I will look at it n equal to 1 to infinity, and I'll put a sticker 2 in front of it. N not equal to 0, okay, Here I should say this minus 1 is twice n not equal to 0. It doesn't, the 2 doesn't really matter. Okay, but you know that n squared is less than n. Sorry, n squared is greater than n when n is greater than or equal to 1. So I can replace this n squared by an n. E to the minus n squared is less than e to the minus n because n squared is greater than n. Okay, and this series I can sum. The sum is e raised to minus pi t, and therefore I'm saying theta t minus 1 decays exponentially for t greater than 1. See, for t near 0, I can say that it looks like square root of t, 1 over square root of t. That is blowing up when t tends to 0. But at t equal to infinity, t tending to infinity, theta t minus 1 is exponentially decreasing. I'm not saying that theta t is exponentially decreasing. So theta t is 1 plus something that is exponentially decreasing. Okay, theta t minus 1 is exponentially decreasing in t. So I hope you understand that theta t minus 1 is equal to that, is less than or equal to that, and this quantity is equal to this thing. So I'm not saying that theta t minus 1 is equal to c times e raised to minus pi t. What I mean is you should read the entire line and conclude that theta t minus 1 is less than or equal to e raised to minus pi t for some constant c. Okay. Very good. Any questions so far? Yeah, what did I do? I closed something. This is still going on. Are there any questions so far? I mean, what I'm doing now is actually much more elementary than the kind of things that I had been doing so far. All that is being involved is something to do with change of variables. Okay, something is integrable, something is not integrable. Do a smart change of variables to show that gamma s into gamma 1 minus s in fact has a nice expression, pi over sine pi. Okay, so these things are quite elementary once you have Cauchy's integral formula or the residue theorem. Any questions? No questions? Yes, questions. Oh, I'm here, no? Yeah. No questions? We can continue. Okay, so this was for the gamma function. Okay. And you are beginning to realize that gamma functions are important because they arise in very natural contexts. So gamma s into gamma 1 minus s is pi over sine pi s. This is what we have proved. Where are we? Gamma s into gamma 1 minus s is pi over sine pi s. Okay. So the Riemann zeta function, zeta of s, is defined for real part of s. S, as I said, is sigma plus it, and the real part is sigma. And I want real part of s is sigma is greater than 1. So this is defined by zeta of s is summation n equal to 1 to infinity 1 over n to the power s. So sigma is greater than 1. So it is greater than, I want it to be bounded away from 1. You know, the trouble is that 1 over n to the power 1 does not converge. Whereas if you are away from the 1 in the n to the power 1, so if s is greater than 1 plus delta, where delta is greater than 0, okay, so it's far away from 1, it's at least at a distance delta from 1, then n to the minus s is less than n to the 1 minus delta, minus 1 minus delta, and therefore it is convergent uniformly and defines a holomorphic function for real part of s, okay, equal to sigma. And in fact, I said that it is holomorphic and on real part of s equal to sigma, which is 1 plus delta for any delta. And therefore it is holomorphic in this region. So what is the next statement? Oops. Just a moment, I'll be back in a moment. I hope. Yeah. Okay. So we have one moment, I'll be just back. Okay, so there's one more elementary change of variables that we need. Okay. Which is that, so you have a certain exponential, there's an n in there, okay? And I'm multiplying it by u to a certain power. The real part of s is greater than 1, okay? Du. My claim is that that particular integral, why do you want to look at this integral? How did I come up with this integral? It's not that difficult to justify why you want to look at that integral, because I want a certain gamma function on the right hand side, okay? And gamma s by 2 will have a s by 2 minus 1, u to the s by 2 minus 1, and e raised to minus u. All I'm doing here is doing some scaling in the u. But there should be a scaling in this u that you have here also. And therefore, it should give me some result that this is something to do with gamma. I hope you understand what I'm saying. This looks very much like a gamma function. Only my u has been scaled to something. Only the u has been scaled to something here. And there is a certain power here, which is exactly the power that I want. So this has to do something with the gamma function. Gamma function at s by 2. Okay. And what exactly should it do? I have to remove this. I have to remove this scaling that I have there in the u. So obviously what do? You remove the scaling. Remove the scaling means change the variables. When you change variables, you will see that you get exactly this. Okay. So this follows from the change of variables theorem. Very good. And finally, we come to page number 100, which I didn't really think we would come to page number 100, but anyway. And it's page number 100 for quite a few densely packed pages. Now, what is theta u minus 1 divided by 2? Theta u was a sum over all z. I'm removing the term which corresponds to n equal to 0. When you remove the term n equal to 0, you get negative integers and positive integers. But the value of the negative integers is the same as the value of the positive integers because there's an n squared there. And therefore it is twice this quantity. And therefore that 2 I'm taking over on this side. Okay. So what is the theorem? The theorem is that, so theta u minus 1 divided by 2 into u to the s by 2 minus 1. But theta u minus 1 divided by 2 is the sum. Okay. So the left-hand side is this quantity, theta u minus 1 by 2 is the sum. Everything is convergent nicely. Okay. So I take the sum out. You know, these things have to be justified. You're taking the sum, interchanging a sum and an integral, but I can't do this because this quantity is exponentially decreasing. I need all those kind of statements. Okay. So I'm taking the sum out. With this quantity, you get u to the s minus 1, s by 2 minus 1 into e to the minus pi n squared u du. But we have just shown that that quantity is pi to the minus s by 2 gamma s by 2 n to the minus s. That is your previous change of variables. Okay. And here there is no n. So I will pull it out, and sum n equal to 1 to infinity n to the minus s is zeta s. Okay. So now we have that this quantity is pi s by 2 gamma s by 2 zeta s for real part of s greater than 1. Okay. And therefore we define the psi function psi of a real part of s greater than 1 by psi s is equal to this quantity. Which quantity? This quantity. Okay. Pi to the minus s by 2 gamma s by 2 zeta of s. Pi to the minus s by 2 gamma s by 2 zeta of s. So now I want to prove that psi of s is equal to psi of 1 minus s for all psi in C. So you know, I have to play around with this theta u minus 1 by half, which was that sum e to the minus pi n squared t. Okay. So theta satisfies a certain functional equation. Theta of u is u to the minus half theta of 1 by u. Psi is like this, theta of u minus 1 by half. Therefore, I can try to find out what is the functional equation which relates psi of u to psi of 1 by u. Why do I expect something like that? Because theta of u is related to theta of 1 by u. Therefore, psi of u should be related to psi of 1 by u. And this is a very easy calculation to do. So you prove that psi of u is related to psi of 1 by u by that particular formula. Psi of u is equal to u to the minus 1 half, psi of 1 by u plus 1 over 2 u to the 1 half minus half. Okay, this is an exercise because I know that theta of u is equal to theta of 1 by u into u to the minus half. So I know a relation between theta of u and theta 1 by u. Therefore, I should get a relation between psi of u and psi 1 by u. And that is a relation. Okay. What is the theorem? Theorem is psi is holomorphic in real part of s greater than 1. It has an analytic continuation as a meromorphic function with simple poles at psi equal to 0 and 1. And psi of s is equal to psi of 1 minus s for all s in C. What was psi? Sorry, there's a psi here and this is a chi, it's called. I didn't really know that. I was also, oh, this is psi. and this is chi. Some such business. Anyway, the symbols are different. Okay. And what was psi? Psi, remember, has something to do with gamma functions and zeta functions. Okay. So psi has something to do with gamma and zeta. And therefore, what if I say that psi of s is psi of 1 minus s, it says that zeta of s is related to zeta of 1 minus s with some factors. Okay. I mean, if you have, this is the definition, and I'm telling you that psi of s is equal to psi of 1 minus s, then this means that zeta of s is equal to something blah, 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 blah into zeta of 1 minus s. Okay, so I'm relating zeta of s to zeta of 1 minus s with some factors before it. Okay, so this will give you the functional identity, functional equation satisfied by zeta of s, namely zeta of s is zeta of 1 minus s into something. And those of you who are in my other class know that we had got exactly such a relationship for the zeta functions for graphs. Okay, that followed in a much more elementary manner once we have the Bhatt-Sahara formula for the zeta function. Okay, for graphs. So you can see that in for actual zeta functions, you have to do a bit more, but not very much more. So I want to prove that zeta of s is zeta 1 minus s. So real part of s be greater than 1. Okay. So real part of 1 minus s is greater than 0. Zeta of s is this. This is my definition. Okay. And I have shown you that this is equal to, where are we now? Zeta of s is equal to, just a moment. Pi to the minus s by 2, gamma s by 2, zeta of s. Where are we? Pi to the minus s by 2, zeta, gamma of s by 2, zeta of s is equal to integral 0 to 1, u to the s by 2 minus 1, theta of u minus 1 divided by 2 du. Theta u minus 1 divided by 2 is what I'm calling psi. Theta u minus 1 divided by 2 is what I'm calling psi. So that particular theorem says that psi of s is equal to this. This is equal to integral 0 to infinity u to the s by 2 minus 1 into theta u minus 1 divided by 2, which I call psi. Okay. Now this integral from 0 to infinity, I break it up. You know, the problems where I have, the problems I have are problems at 0 and the problem at infinity. So I sort of break up these problems. It's always good when you're doing something to isolate the problems that you have. Don't think of all the problems at the same time. This is a deep philosophical statement. Don't try to solve all the problems of the world simultaneously, but you try to solve them one by one. So I have a problem at 0 and infinity. So I try to solve these problem at 0 first and the problem at infinity separately. So I break it up from 0 to 1 plus 1 to infinity. Okay. Now the part from 0 to 1, okay, of psi of u. Yeah. I want to somehow change that integral from 0 to 1 to be an integral from 1 to infinity. Okay. And what is the obvious thing which will change the interval 0 to 1 to the interval 1 to infinity? The obvious change of variables is u going to 1 by u. Because when the first u goes from 0 to 1, the second u will go from infinity to 1. There'll be a minus sign, therefore it will become from 1 to infinity. Okay. So in the first integral from 0 to 1, okay, I do a change of variables. Yes. And when you do the change of variables, no, sorry, from 0 to 1, I don't yet do the change of variables. I have psi of u. But what have I proved about psi of u? Where am I? Here. Psi of u is like this. Psi of u is related to psi of 1 by u. And then you have various terms. So psi of u, this psi of u, for the first integral from 0 to 1, I substitute that. Psi of u is equal to u to the minus 1/2 psi of 1 by u plus 1 over 2 u to the 1/2 minus 1/2 du. The second integral from 1 to infinity, I keep as it is. Okay. Now, so here I have three terms. Okay. U to the s by 2 minus 1, u to the minus 1/2 psi 1 by u du. And then I have this particular integral, u to the s by 2 minus 1 with a 1/2 into u to the minus 1/2 du, and u to the s by 2 minus 1 into minus 1/2 to u du. These two integrals, the middle two integrals, I can evaluate easily. The first integral is 1 over s minus 1, and the second integral is 1 over s. Okay, because I can evaluate those integrals explicitly. Then I have the first integral and the fourth integral. In the first integral, I change variables, 1 by u equal to v. Okay, and then I call v equal to u. And then you will get that when you do this change of variables, 0 to 1 becomes 1 to infinity. And this business here will become a psi of u. And there'll be a factor here, which is this factor. These two terms are the integrals from these middle two terms, and you have the last term. Now, both these things I put together because both are from 1 to infinity. So you'll get psi of s is 1 over s minus 1 minus 1 over s plus integral from 1 to infinity u to the s by 2 minus half plus u to the s by 2 minus 1. U to the minus s by 2 minus half plus u to the s by 2 minus 1 psi u du. Now, psi u is integrable. Everything is integrable at infinity. Okay. All those integrals make sense at infinity. Over every finite region, of course, that makes sense. U, remember, is going from 1 to infinity. Okay. And psi u is decaying at infinity. Because theta u minus 1 decays exponentially at infinity. Therefore, those integrals, all those integrals make sense. Now just stare at that integral on the right-hand side. It is uniformly convergent for any bounded region of S. Integral decays exponentially. So psi is analytic with simple poles at s equal to 0 and s equal to 1. And the integral defines a meromorphic function for all c. The right-hand side, I shouldn't say the integral, I should say the right-hand side defines a meromorphic function, only simple poles. And the right-hand side, when you change s to 1 minus s, so this 1 over s will become 1 over 1 minus s. There's a minus sign. There's 1 over s minus 1. 1 over s minus 1 will become 1 minus s minus 1, which will be 1 over s, and there's a minus sign. Okay, look at this particular integrand. Change s to s minus 1. You will see that this term becomes this term, and the second term becomes the first term. What is this saying? So I hope you will do this. Change s to 1 minus s. The right-hand side remains the same. The first term, 1 over s minus 1, becomes the second term, minus 1 over s. And the second term becomes the first term, 1 over s minus 1. In that integral, the first integrand becomes the second integrand. And the second integrand becomes the first integrand. I'm just telling you this, but you should take a piece of paper and a pen and a pencil, a pen and a piece of paper, and convince yourself that the first term becomes the second term becomes the first term, the first integrand, that is the third term, becomes the fourth term, and the fourth term becomes the third term when you change s to 1 minus s. And therefore, zeta of s is zeta of 1 minus s. Okay? So zeta of s is zeta of 1 minus s. What is zeta of s? Zeta of s is this. What is zeta of 1 minus s? Zeta of 1 minus s is this. Therefore, zeta of s is functionally related to zeta of 1 minus s. Okay? Zeta of 1 minus s is something into zeta of s. Something depending on s, which I know. You take all those terms on the right hand side. Okay? So this is the functional equation for the zeta function. Okay? Again, what does it depend on? It depends only on residue calculus and the Poisson summation formula for theta functions. Okay, that particular theta function. These are the two ingredients that we used here. Then, of course, at the end of this, I have what is the functional equation for zeta functions on graphs. And the difference also, remember, is that, when you're talking about graph theory for regular graphs, we had more than one functional equation. And I really don't know if there are other functional equations that the classical zeta function satisfies. Okay? And it may not be zeta of s and zeta of 1 minus s, but is there some other functional equation that zeta of s satisfies? I don't really know. Some of you who are doing something in number theory should try to find out. This is one functional equation for zeta functions, classical zeta functions. Are there any others? Okay. I don't really know the answer to that question, but I would expect that there should be some other functional equations for zeta functions, but I don't really know. So anyway, this is the reason why I wanted to do this. Okay. I wanted to prove this functional equation for zeta functions. Okay, the classical zeta functions. Because in the other class I'm teaching, we have already come across a functional equation. We have come across 3 different functional equations for zeta functions on regular graphs. Okay. There, of course, things were easier because those zeta functions were 1 over a polynomial. And they had various properties. So this is actually, the proof of zeta functions, the functional equation for zeta functions in the classical setup. Okay, and as you can see, after proving the residue theorem and Poisson summation formula, this sort of falls out quite easily. After, of course, you have been very smart in figuring out what is the change of variables that you have to do. Okay. Okay, so questions. We have 5 minutes remaining. Questions about anything we are doing now? No. Rahul, you've sent this to everyone, haven't you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, I think all your notes so far are complete, and you should please go through these. There are lots of so-called gaps in what I've written down, but those gaps are things that are quite elementary. Okay, you have to sit down and verify certain things. Okay, and those verifications are quite straightforward. So I hope you will do that, and you will see that, it's actually, I hope you understand that there's something very beautiful in this business about gamma functions and zeta functions. You understand why gamma functions arise very naturally in this setup. Okay, and there's this intimate relationship between gamma functions and zeta functions, and of course the chi function, what I call the chi. Okay. Any questions? No questions?